Kiddushin Daf Yomi Make her yours, האשה נקנית. Starting off with Masechet Kidushin, we're starting a new Masechet. We start with special brachas that we got from one of our regular participants who isn't in the room with us. David and Channa Walles of Kosher Travelers made a very significant contribution so that we should have bracha, we should have success in the learning of Kiddushin together. And in fact, Kosher Travelers was founded, but used to be called Eddie's Traveler. Eddie was Joey's brother. So we've got the whole core, and this was in the days when kosher travel was not easy and was not trendy yet. They really pioneered the world of kosher travel. So I hope one day we'll do a Matmonim tour to all the places of these Rishonim and we learn about. In fact, we're starting a new Masechet, the Baalei Tosfos. This is a new Tosfos. We've the Tosfos on each Masechet are written by different people. And it seems that the Tosfos of Masechet Kidushin were written by the Tosfos Ivro. Ivro is a town in Normandy, which is about 100 kilometers east of Paris. And not a very important town, but for us it's important. That's where the Tosfos Ivro were, so that has to be on our itinerary. You need to go to Ivro and see where these Tosfos were written. There were three brothers who were called the Tosfos Ivro. It was Rabbi Moshe, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yitzchak were three brothers who headed the school of Ivro. And these Tosfos are from their school. We see, in fact, on our Omud that Rabbeinu Manoach is quoted. Rabbeinu Manoach is 13th century Provence. So we see that the Tosfos is from the French school, and we see that it's from the 13th century. It's relatively modern, which means they had access to a lot of what had been said before them, and we'll have a lot of pleasure and insights in learning Kiddushin with these Tosfos. In order to understand Kiddushin, we've got to understand the glaring question, which is the sequence. Why does Kiddushin follow Gittin? Why do we learn about divorce before we learn about marriage? Surely we should learn about Kiddushin first and then about Gittin. And in order to understand that, we've got to learn the last lines of Masechet Gittin. If we understand the last lines of Masechet Gittin, we'll understand the opening of Masechet Kidushin and how Kiddushin flows from it. Because in essence, we're going to learn from how difficult it is to get divorced, how important the marriage is. You actually need to study how hard it is to end a marriage to know how important the initiation of the marriage is. Then were it not for the Gzerat HaKatuv, were it not for the decree in the Posuk of the Chatav La Sefer Pitut V'Natan B'Yadai, if it weren't for that verse, which we've been studying for 3 months, you wouldn't be able to divorce a wife. Why should you be able to divorce a wife? There's an element of hekdesh, of kedusha, hareat mekudeshetli, we say. And in hekdesh, we know if you make something sanctified, if you make something hekdesh for the Beis Hamikdash, you can't undo it, you can't divorce it. So why would you be able to be mekadesh a woman and then divorce her? The answer is you can't. If it weren't for the posuk in the Torah that gave you specific permission and how to do it, we've got a whole masechet as to how to do it. From that you learn how deep the connection is that is created in Kiddushin. Now we can get into Kiddushin. And to understand the last lines of Masechet Gittin, it revolves around a posuk in Malachi. Malachi is the last of our prophets. He's already in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash. And Malachi is very upset about the fact that Jewish people are marrying non-Jewish women. On Shabbos we learned that when the Smaig went to Spain, he was worried. In the 13th century, he was upset about the same, 12th century, he was upset about the same things there. And the prophet Malachi talks to them harshly about that. One of the things he says is, Hisanei shalach, amar Hashem Elokei Yisrael. Hashem hates divorce. And the question is, what does it mean he hates divorce? Rabbi Yehuda Omer at the end of Gittin, Im saneita shalach. As much as we don't like divorce, but don't live with a woman you've fallen out of love with. If you're in love with another woman, don't stay with this woman under false pretenses. Rather be open and be honest and divorce her. That's what it means. Rabbi Yochanan was Sanui HaMeshalech. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, this is not to say that you must divorce her. On the contrary, Sanui HaMeshalech. Malachi says Hashem hates the man who divorces his wife. The law pligi, says the Gemara. And these two views of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yehuda are not at odds with each other. Ha bezivug rishon, ha bezivug sheni. It depends whether it's the first marriage or the second marriage. The first marriage, Hashem hates the man who divorces his wife. That's a very strong language, although the Gemara just before then, in the last Daf of Gittin, goes through the grounds for divorce. And Rabbi Akiva, and according to Rabbi Akiva, it can be very light reasons. So a man can divorce his wife, and it's not something that Hashem is happy with. A man who divorces his first wife, even the mizbeach, even the altar, sheds tears. Shene'emar, back to Malachi, a few psukim earlier. V'zot shinita. Not only are you marrying non-Jewish women, that's bad enough that unmarried men are marrying non-Jewish women. But kasot dima'at mizbach bechiv anacha. But the mizbeach is covered by the tears of women who come to the mizbeach and cry, why has he abandoned me? Because what was happening, says Rashi, that the women who used to go were going through the hardship of the Golah. This is now just after the Golah, the rebuilding of the second Beis Hamikdash. We've had all the hardship of the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. The women have aged. The women don't look like what they looked like before. They've lost a lot of their beauty. And what were the men doing? Marrying attractive young non-Jewish women who hadn't been through all that ordeal. Says Chagit, says Malachi, how could you do that? How could you abandon your wives because they've lost the beauty that they had before, because they've gone through Jewish tzoros, they've gone through Jewish tragedy, and go and marry somebody who hasn't experienced Jewish tragedy? How could you do such a thing? And the Mizbeach cries, so the Mizbeach no longer accepts your sacrifices. And when you say, why are you so angry with us? We know the last page of Gittin, you're allowed to divorce a wife if you find that she no longer is attractive to you, no longer appeals to you, she's done something wrong. Says Malachi, yes, you're right. If she had done something wrong, you would have been allowed to divorce her. But she's done nothing wrong. That's it. That's such a sad ending. Such a sad piece of Tanakh at the end of Masechet Kidushin. She's done nothing wrong. She's just experienced tragedy. She's Jewish. She's been through the Churban and the Golus. And now she's not attractive to you all of a sudden. You want a non-Jewish woman who hasn't been through all of that and looks all fine and beautiful because she hasn't suffered Jewish suffering? How could you do that? You have been the one who's abandoned. You've been treacherous. She is still your friend, your companion. The eshet britecha, and the wife with whom you made a covenant. Because marriage is not an alliance that when the common threat disappears, the alliance dissolves. And marriage is not a partnership governed by common purpose. And when there's no longer common purpose, decide together, let's abandon the partnership. No, a marriage is eshet britecha. It's a brit. It's a covenant of sacrifice. I will make sacrifice for you. I will put you before me. That's what marriage is. And when somebody has made sacrifices for you, you don't walk out on her because she's no longer attractive to you. That's not okay. If she's done something wrong, okay, there are grounds for divorce. But she's no longer attractive to you? When you've got a covenant of commitment and sacrifice, what is this about the Mizbeach? Is sheds tears. We learned in Gemara Sota back on Daf Yomi in Sota that Rabbi Akiva said, Ish v'isha zachu shchina b'neim lo zachu esho chaltan. That a man and a woman, if they merit it, then there's the Shechina is among them, like the Beis Hamikdash, like the Mizbeach. And if they're not, so then lo zachu esho chaltan. Then a fire, Rashi says, what happens? A fire comes down. If you take the Yud and the Hey out of Ish v'Isha, you've got Eish and Eish, as Rabbi Akiva. My son had a beautiful insight into this and saying, this explains why it's the Mizbeach that sheds tears. Because what is Rabbi Akiva saying? This idea of the fire comes and consumes the husband and wife. That's the metaphor Rabbi Akiva is using. A husband and a wife are like a Mizbeach because they sacrifice for one another. And they sacrifice for Yiddishkeit together. That's what marriage is. And if they're not zochu, if they're not at peace together, then this eish, the fire comes down and consumes them. And that's why when the marriage breaks up, the first marriage breaks up. Second marriage is different. First marriage is a special connection. Filu mizbeach morid alav debarot. Even mizbeach sheds tears for him. What is it? How do you make a connection so deep between a man and a woman? How do you make a connection so deep that even the mizbeach cries when there's a divorce, when they separate? In other religions, holy people don't get married. And what are we saying? That marriage is something so holy that the Mizbeach itself sheds tears when it breaks up. How do you do that? That's the question with which Masechet Kidushin opens. How do you create such connection that without Exeris HaKosov you can't break? And when you do break it, the Mizbeach bursts into tears. How do you create such connection? Says the Mishnah, the opening Mishnah of Kiddushin. Haisha nikneit b'shlosha drachim. There are three ways by which a woman Nikneit is acquired, so to say. It says Rashi Labala, in which a woman becomes his. Not becomes his from a sense of power and ownership, but becomes his from a sense of responsibility and protection and investment. You are mine, I will take care of you. You are mine, I will invest in you. You are mine, I will protect you. That's what it means. That's what Kiddushin is. How does that happen? Bishlosha drachim, there are three ways. And the Gemara on Amud Beis discusses why use the word derech? Why not use devarim? There are three things by which a man can acquire a wife. And the Gemara concludes, because derech means it's a way of being. It's urcha da'aro, it's a way of being. It's not just an action, it's not a transaction. And I want you to understand this mission in a way that we'll use right throughout the Masechet. What does it mean? Ha'isha nikneit, the woman is made yours in three ways. What are the ways? Kesef, shtar, and biyah. Through money, through a written document, and through intimacy. Those are the three ways. And that's a way of being with a woman. That's not just a transaction under a chuppah. That's a way of being. That a man spends money on his wife. That a man communicates with his wife. He writes her love letters. We talked about the power of writing. And that writing is different from speaking. And writing is different from typing. You don't send your wife text messages. You write her letters. You write gift cards for her. You write birthday cards for her. You write Rosh Hashanah cards for her. You write love letters to her. Shtar is not transaction at the time. It's a derech. It's a way by which you make a woman yours. And bevia, you're intimate with her. You're close with her. You have physical contact with her. Those are the three things that have to be in a marriage to make a woman yours, and it has to be done daily. Rav Shimon Shkop has an incredibly advanced idea that these kinyonim are not once off, they take place throughout the marriage. And we learned in Masechet Kidushin that the idea that a man can divorce at will, that he can just end midoraisa, can just end the relationship, is so that the woman knows every day he's chosen to be with me. It's not that because he could have just walked out. That's the gift to the woman of the man's right to unilaterally divorce her. Because if he can unilaterally divorce her, that means every day he doesn't do that, he's choosing to be with her. Says Reb Shimon Shkop, and choosing to be with her means with these three kinyanim. He invests in her in these three ways. He invests in her with money, he invests in her with communication, and he invests with her in a physical way. That's what he does with her. And I used to tell my daughters when they were dating, this didn't apply to any of the wonderful four men who found each of them. We didn't have to apply to when they were dating other people. But if you go out on a date and the man doesn't pay, he allows you to even suggest paying. That's the last date with that particular man because there's no kesef. If the man never writes you a beautiful letter, doesn't communicate his feelings to you, end of the date, he doesn't understand shtar. Bia will have to wait for later. But to understand those things, even in the dating process. And so that says the Gemara, that's how you create this depth of connection that is so deep. The Gemara says afterwards, we talk about the Loshen Kaddish. Why do we use Loshen Kiddushin? Because the Asar La'akula Alma Kehektish, when you get married, there's an Isur. You're actually changing the status of a woman where she's no longer permitted to anybody else. And says Tosfos, that's part of the idea of Hektish. In Hektish, you're dedicating something to the Beis HaMikdash and for no other reason. So here, the woman is being dedicated to this relationship and to nothing else and to nobody else. This is a communion of Kedusha. There's sanctity in this. And that's why the Gemara Gittin ends up understanding how difficult it is to get divorced. You need a whole Masechta to understand this Gzerat HaKatuv. What does V'chatavla mean? What does V'natan B'yada mean? Because if it's not done exactly right, there's only one other way for her to gain her freedom, our Mishnah says, and that's mitat habal. Hashem can give her a freedom by taking the life of the husband away, then she can get her freedom. But if you want to give her freedom, it has to be done with the get, it has to be done in the right way. And in the case of the bond between a first husband and wife, that bond is so deep that breaking that bond is something which is halachically permissible under certain circumstances. But that doesn't mean that the Mizbeach itself doesn't cry, because such depth of communion has been created. Such an Eshet Britecha, a relationship of Brit, a relationship of covenant, of willingness to sacrifice between husband and wife is created, that can't be broken any other way. So it's through learning about Gittin, so learning how hard the breakage and the separation is, that we understand how deep the connection and the Kedusha is.